Continuamos con el programa de conferencias. Agradecemos la conferencia del Dr. Real y escucharemos a continuación al Dr. Sean Cole, PIC SRVP of Research and Development, Euros Group LP de Madison, Wisconsin, cuya disertación se titula ¿Cómo será la vaca del futuro y cómo la crearemos?
My name is John Cole. I'm the PEAK Senior Vice President for Research and Development. PEAK is part of the Eurus Group LP, which is the largest producer of cattle genetics in the world. Before I joined PEAK, I was a research scientist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture with their research service. And my work there focused on genetic and genomic improvement of dairy cattle. And I'm very grateful to the organizers today who have invited me to speak to you all about the cow of the future. And so my goal today is to talk a little bit about what I think the dairy cow might look like in the future and share some ideas about how we might produce that cow. And in the talks, some things will be, very, let's say, very focused. They're things that we're already doing. There will be a few things in the talk that are maybe a little bit of speculation about things we might be able to do in the future. So we try to have a mix of topics here. So I will start out. I just want to maybe make sure we are all on the same page and we understand why do we need a cow? Why do we need to change the dairy cow at all, right? Not everybody agrees on that. How will we do that? What do I personally think this cow might look like? And we'll talk about some specific attributes of the cow. And then we'll have a few closing thoughts in sort of the big picture view. So why do we need a cow of the future? I mean, what's wrong with the cow today? Whoops. There we go. Sorry. Well, really, this is a U.S. perspective that's shown on this slide. So I understand the situation might be a little bit different in Argentina, but I hope you'll come with me because I have to have a basis for conversation sometimes, right? So over on the left is from the Holstein Association in the U.S., and that was the ideal Holstein cow in the 1960s. You can see she's smaller stature, she's shorter in the body, little bit different looking cow than we see today. Then if we go around to the bottom, you can see in the 1970s that they started thinking we want a bigger framed cow, a taller cow, a cow that really has the body capacity to support more milk and milk solids production. Then on the right, you see in 2012, they again rethought things. She stays taller, looking to make her a little bit shorter in the body. And then you can see at the top, what does the ideal cow for the 2020s look like? And the point here is that everything changes with time, right? So the feeds we use, our management practices, the climate, and in fact, the social situation we find ourselves in changes over time. So if we think about what sort of foods consumers want in their diets, right, and their requests for how animals are treated, all these things change. So we have to change our cows too, right, if we want to continue to efficiently produce healthy food for human diets. And I don't think it's any different in Argentina than it is in the US, that all of us in our industry are under more and more pressure to produce more food with fewer resources. So on the left, you can see these are just some figures from about population growth and what parts of the world the population is going to change in. And then on the right is really just some trends in anticipated global temperature. So the point is, we have to change whether we want to or not because the world is changing. That includes where people are, what they want in their diet, and then the availability of land and other resources to support cattle production. Okay, but at the same time, we talk about all of these things. I think we need to recognize that animal-based foods are an important part of human diets, and they're dense in lots of nutrients. So in this figure here, some nutritional scientists looked at lots of different foods. So you can see everything from liver, right, from animal organ meat, through to various milk and manufactured dairy products, all the way down to many different varieties of crops, right? So whole grains, nuts, millet, all those sorts of things. On the left, the figure shows you the caloric density, right? So how much energy is in different foods. And this slide's a little bit funny because you might think that a wide bar is better. In this case, a narrow bar is better. And the point here is that all of the foods at the top of the list that have the highest density of energy are animal source foods. And if you look on the right and you say, well, how much of these foods would I have to eat to meet my nutritional requirements, you can also see that the animal source foods stack up very favorably. So if you look just at the bottom where it's refined grains, right? So say white flour, which I think maybe is more common in US and European diets than some other parts of the world. You have to eat, a tremendous, you have to eat like 4 kilograms a day to meet a little over a third of your average requirements. But you only have to eat a small quantity of organ meat or of milk or eggs. So this is good for our industry because it says, animals, especially ruminant animals that can turn food humans can't eat into food that humans can eat. That's an important aspect of human diets. And then as well that they can provide lots of high quality nutrients. Okay. And these are US figures, apologies, but we all know that there's a political conversation going on about greenhouse gas emissions. And in the US, you see a cow down there on the figure, and it says that 10% of US greenhouse gas emissions come from the agriculture sector. You might think from the cow that it's coming from cattle. No, that's both crop animal and animal production in the US. But let's say ethically and politically, we can't just say that, oh, it's only 10%, it doesn't matter, right? And the truth is that through the process of enteric fermentation in the rumen, that cows do make a lot of methane. So we need to figure out what we can do in our sector to improve efficiency. And one aspect of improved efficiency is less feed consumption and less production of things like CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide. So these are sort of the facts, right? But there's good news. I don't want you to all think I have nothing but bad news here. This figure is showing you how much methane is emitted by dairy cows per kilogram of milk produced. So what I've done here is I've circled in red the Central and South America figures. And you can see that there's a decline there. And really, the dairy sector in Argentina is well positioned. There's obviously room for improvement to get over to the far right where you see Europe and North America, but I'd say you're on the right path. And this is going to be an important part of the discussion, not just how much total methane was produced, but how much methane was produced per unit of output. And you can see, our colleagues in sub-Saharan Africa on the far left, obviously there are great opportunities to improve efficiency there as well. But I feel like this is good news because it means as we improve the efficiency of our management and we improve the quality of our genetics, we're going in the right direction. We're producing more food for humans with fewer undesirable byproducts. In the bottom line, at least in the US, is that there are some fairly easy things we can do, right? There are some feed additives on the market that are very promising that can have reductions in the 20 to 30% range of methane. And depending on the size of your operation, and I recognize that may be a big difference between Argentina and the US. Large dairies in the US can look at things like covering their manure pits or installing digesters as a way of reducing their total methane footprint. That requires a large enough size of your operation to be economical, but the technology's there. And what we see very clearly is that some sort of carbon pricing in the economy is coming, and we can either refuse to come along with it or we can get left behind. If we want to continue to have social license to be part of the food system, we're going to have to do our share. And that comes back to the cow of the future. The cow of the future is going to have to make less methane. So how are we going to make this cow? Well, I'm a scientist. So my first inclination is always, my instinct is that we need more data, right? Let's measure more things, and we can measure more things, and then we can have more tools that we use to make decisions. It is possible that there's a diminishing return here. I hope this cartoon translates well to Spanish. And in the US, and I think in South America as well, we're used to what I call a traditional phenotyping scheme. So think about a milk recording program, right? We've had milk recording in the US since the late 19th century. So many farms participate. It's what I call low intensity phenotyping. And what I mean by that is we record a few observations per animal. It's in this case, in the US, it's common to have 10 samples taken over the course of a lactation, right? So monthly testing. This is well suited to traits with low recording costs. So this is a perfect system for looking at milk and characteristics of milk. It's maybe not as helpful for looking at things like potentially health traits or some aspects of fertility, because the biology of those traits is different, and you don't always get enough information when you measure the cow once every 30 days. So we can also think about alternative phenotyping schemes. This is a case where we look at using a smaller number of farms, but we go onto those farms and we do very intensive data recording. Okay, so we measure lots and lots of things in the farm. Now, this often, requires some investment in equipment. And the idea is that, let's think about feed intake for a second. In the US, we have 9 million dairy cows. We're never going to put 9 million bins for measuring feed intake in the US. But maybe you say, what if we put a few thousand? We have a specific, carefully targeted program for measuring these things. And this works well for expensive to measure traits. So you can think about feed intake, you might think about greenhouse gas emissions, those kinds of things where it's difficult to measure them at large scale. I recognize that there are some changes. Some research has said we can use methane sniffers. That's much lower cost, so maybe we can record more animals. And there's the potential to use some other data I'll talk about in just a second related to the milk sample. Because we hear a lot, at least when you go to scientific congresses, you hear a lot about the milk sample. So one of the things we can do in the milk testing laboratory, and I believe that's a Fosamatic you see in the top left, is you can shine some infrared light through a sample of milk. And then you measure the light that bounces back, right? Or you measure the light that's let through the milk sample. And this gives you lots and lots of observations. I think it's 1,066 different measurements per milk sample on the Fosamatic. We can put that absorbance spectrum together with measurements we've made about milk samples, right? So it could be how much fat's in the sample, how much lactose. It could be something more complicated, like the fatty acid composition of milk or the specific protein composition of milk. We put that together, we do some prediction so that we can put the milk spectrum in one end and get a prediction of performance out the other end. And then we can use this for all of the animals that we phenotype. This system is being used for some traits already. And our friends at Lactanet in Canada have recently announced that they're going to start offering methane predictions based on this kind of approach. So this isn't strictly speculation anymore. This is something that folks are doing, or they're going to be doing in the real world. So that's pretty exciting. And I'm not really going to talk a lot about genomics here because I don't think it's the most interesting thing at this exact point in time. I think it's interesting, but we cannot ignore the fact that genomics has really helped us go faster. In the US, the rate of genetic gain is about twice today what it was in 2008 before genomics. And an exciting thing about genomics is we're not only making the bulls better, but we're also making the cows better much faster than we were able to do in the past. So we're actually coming from both sides of the pedigree here to make the cows better. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about some speculative sorts of things. But what are other tools we could use to change the cow, to build the cow we want for the future? We're going to see a lot of pictures in the next few slides. I'm not going to go into every little single technical detail, but I'm going to talk about the big picture here. And I think it's difficult to not hear or read about gene editing fairly often. I recognize this is a little bit of a difficult topic because the regulatory system is different in each country, and some countries are very restrictive, right? Currently, Europe is not really allowing the use of this kind of technology, certainly in animal agriculture, not in crops either. And I'm aware that this is changing very quickly. So I believe Argentina actually has some recent regulatory decisions that are favorable. Some of the other countries in South America do as well, such as Brazil. I realize it's a danger to say anything good about Brazil, but they're forward thinking like you are. We're maybe in the middle in the U.S. We've made some progress, but we're not at the leading edge here. So the whole idea with gene editing, right, to take it at its simplest, is this is a set of various molecular biology tools that let us go in and make precise changes in animal genomes. And the key here is the precision with which we can make these changes. And that makes these tools a lot different than the older tools that are available. And in cattle, we certainly have a few, say, easy examples of where we could use this. So we're talking about Holsteins today, or I've been talking about Holsteins. So we think about polled, right? Because the gene that makes horns is at an extremely high frequency, at least in the U.S. Holstein population. It's more than 99%. So it's very difficult to change that with genetics because you have so far to go. And I don't know that there's a single farmer anywhere in this world who likes to dehorn calves. So if we can make all of our cows polled at birth, that would be pretty great. We think about the slick phenotype, which confers, it produces animals that have better tolerance of hot and humid conditions, right? It's a mutation in something called the prolactin receptor gene. There are some potential targets related to disease resistance, for tuberculosis, things like that. And there are also some potential targets related to things like marbling and tenderness. So if we think about the bigger picture, not just to producing milk and milk solids, we also think, well, what about beef on dairy kinds of offspring? So how do we make calves that cattle feeders want in their production system? And the last point I'm going to leave you with about gene editing, because this is a very important idea to understand. This does not involve taking a gene from one species, let's say a fish, and moving it into another species like cattle. All we're doing with gene editing is manipulating the DNA of the cow directly. We're not moving things from one place to another. That was always something that folks were very uncomfortable with, and that's not what we're doing anymore. I'm going to go a little faster on some of these because I think they're a little more familiar. So I think folks are more familiar with cloning, right? And that's just a tool that lets us make a genetically identical copy of an animal. It's perhaps not as useful in the genomics era as it might have been in the past, at least for seed stock, because we're turning the bulls over so quickly. By the time you've made a clone of a bull and that clone is able to produce semen, well, you're already 2 generations down the line. But cloning is an important part of the systems used with some of the other tools I'll talk about. So that's sort of where we are there. I know in the US anyway, there's been some recent discussion in the media of something called surrogate sire technology, and I'll try to explain this as simply as I can. And the idea here is that the question is, what if one bull could produce the genetics of a second bull instead of their own genetics? So it's a little bit like cloning, in the sense that you all of a sudden have 2 animals or 3 animals or 4 animals that all produce the same genetics. But the idea with surrogate sires is that you could do it very early in the life of the donor animal. And this would let you get around the limited semen production capacity of young bulls. It's not without flaws, right? One of the challenges is that it does not help us solve our challenges related to genetic diversity and then protecting the health of the population. There are also a number of technical challenges related to this that have to be solved. But the idea is you can take some cells from one bull, you can inject them into a second bull that's been gene edited so that it doesn't make its own DNA in the sperm, and then all of a sudden you have 2 bulls. It's really it sounds quite fantastic, but it's coming. It's just slow. There's another system that's received a lot of attention in the last year or so, and it's called in vitro breeding. And the really simple idea of this is, what if we didn't have to fertilize an oocyte, implant the embryo, wait for that calf to reach reproductive age to make a selection decision? What if we could do all of this with cells in a dish? So the idea is you can take an embryo, you can take a cell from that embryo, and the laboratory folks can make it develop into an oocyte or into a spermatozoa. You can then fertilize that or use that to fertilize another oocyte in a dish. And the idea is you do all of this at a bench in a laboratory. And the point is that you could go very fast and you could make several generations go by in the course of 1 year so that you could dramatically increase the rate of genetic gain. Now, of course, you're going to eventually have to make live animals, but the idea is that you wouldn't have to make them quite as often. Again, these are all the pieces of this system all sort of work in the laboratory, but it's a little bit different to say that something can work in a laboratory with a team of very skilled technicians and unlimited time and lots of money. That's not the same as something that's going to work in the field every day. So this is more of a concept than it is a practical tool today. And then there's also been some discussion about biological sexing. So what do I mean? Well, what if when you collected a bull, you only got male sperm or female sperm, and you didn't have to put that semen in an instrument and sort it? Wouldn't that be better? I think we probably all agree that that would be better. And research on this is underway as well. So the bull shown on this slide, his name is Cosmo on the right. The idea is that because of some gene editing that's been done with him, and I can't explain all of it, he will produce 75% male offspring. So you're saying, well, that's not 100% male offspring or 100% female offspring. You're right, but we have to start somewhere, right? You don't start playing in the World Cup. You start playing in the street. So it's a first step. And the idea is that we can have higher sperm quality, right? Higher field fertility, because we don't have to collect that ejaculate, do a bunch of things to it in the laboratory, and then try to breed a cow with it. And, so it will increase fertility, it will reduce costs. But again, this is probably, a few years down the road. It's not something that's going to be here tomorrow, but it's a different approach to the problem. And so all this slide is intended to emphasize to you is that we can take these different tools, right? So if you look in the top left, we can take sexed semen, and or we can take gene editing. We can use that for embryo transfer. And hey, maybe clones are part of that system as well. We can do in vitro breeding. We can do biological sexing. The point here is that all of these things can fit together into complicated systems that can help us improve the rate of genetic change in the population. And that will let us make the changes we need to make to produce the dairy cow of the future. So there's not going to be a quiz, so don't worry. I hope I explained all of this okay, but there's a lot of moving parts here. It takes a lot of thinking. And I did talk some about gene editing, and this actually happened over the summer, but I left it in the presentation because it's a big deal, and I wanted to share it with you all because it's a big deal. In the United States now, there is a way for gene-edited livestock products to go into the market. So our friends at Selección did some gene editing to produce slick red Angus cattle, and they now have permission to market those animals. So that's good news, right? But I don't want to oversell things, right? Because just because you can send a product to market does not mean that a store is going to put it on the shelves. They may feel that their customers aren't ready for that yet. And even if it's on the shelf in the store, as you all know, we can't make somebody buy a product. So the consumers may not be ready for these, gene edited feedstuffs in the marketplace, but the regulatory structure is now there. So it's up to us in part, right? All of us working in animal agriculture to help explain to our friends and help explain to our neighbors what these tools are and what they are not, so that people can make educated decisions instead of fearful decisions. And what we have learned from doing surveys, at least of consumers in the North, is that consumers are much more accepting of the idea of gene editing when it's used for the promotion of animal welfare. So they're not interested in the tool if all you're going to do is make more milk with it. They're interested in things like disease resistance, polled, that sort of thing. Okay. And this slide is sort of like the slide I showed you 2 slides ago. Again, it's just to emphasize all of these things fit together into systems. So when you talk about gene editing, you say gene editing, but there's really a lot of different things happening there. There's the act of editing cells in tissue. Then you have to test them to make sure that you made the right edit in the right place in the genome. You have to make sure you didn't change anything you didn't want to change. You have to make embryos, all of those kinds of things. So when I describe it to you, it seems very simple, but the truth is it takes a lot of things to make it happen. So what do I think this cow is going to look like? Maybe this is the thing that many of you would really like to know. What is the cow of the future going to be? Now, I know that this is a little bit US focused, but it's the information I had available to me. So this is information from the U.S. National Genomic Evaluations, and this is for our national index, for the Lifetime Net Merit Index, which is a measure in U.S. dollars of profitability. So a cow with a positive net merit will be more profitable over the course of her life than a cow that has a net merit of 0 or a negative net merit. And because this is using genomic information, I know I can go into the database, or I could when I worked for USDA, and I could say, what's the best chromosome in the population, right? So there are 30 chromosomes in the cattle genome. So I could say, of all the millions of animals we've genotyped in the US, what is the individual chromosome 1 that's the best, and the chromosome 2 that's the best, etc. And I said, what if we added all of those up? Well, we would have a predicted transmitting ability of almost $3,600 US. And that's something like 3 times higher than the best net merit bull available today. So what is this telling us? The point here is that we can make a lot more progress than we've made so far. That's a good thing. So then in a paper a couple of years ago, Paul Van Raden and I said, well, over the next 50 years, how much progress do we think we'll make? So this is in pounds, not kilos for the production traits, but this will give you an idea, right? So over the next 50 years, based on the information we had available, we're saying the dairy cow in 50 years is going to make another 10,000 pounds of milk, right? So say another 4,500 kilos of milk, another couple hundred kilos of fat, not quite as much protein. She'll live 65 months longer, right? Her working life. So that's more than 5 years, 5.5 years longer. She'll be smaller, So this is body size in pounds. So that's about 100 kilos smaller. She'll have a better udder, better fertility. She'll eat less feed. So about 5,000 fewer kilos of feed over the course of a lactation. And she'll produce less methane than she does today. And, you know, I'm not saying these numbers are perfect. You know, they could be off by a fair bit, right? It's really hard to say what's going to happen over 50 years. This was based on the information we had available, but we think it paints a very positive picture. There's a lot of opportunity to change the cow in ways that are better for everyone, including the cow. But one of the things I did want to talk about as we talk about the cow of the future is, what are we really trying to change about the cow? What are we trying to improve? And, you know, we often, all of us use language that's not very precise. So we talk about efficiency, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about profitability. Well, those things overlap a little bit, right? They mean some of the same things, but they don't mean exactly the same thing. And then there's a whole, you know, other world of things you could put around that, individual traits that contribute to those overall goals. And I don't have an answer to this. I'm not here to tell you exactly what your selection index should look like. I'm simply here to say with this slide that we need to have a careful conversation to make sure that everybody in Argentina, when you talk about, we want to make a more sustainable cow, well, what does it actually mean? What is a more sustainable cow? Does she eat less feed? Is she more profitable? You know, does she live longer? You know, so that's a conversation that everyone needs to have, you know, in the context of their production system. But what do I think? I think obviously the cow of the future will be more efficient. And what I mean is she will eat less feed per unit of fat and protein produced, because really we're in the protein business. We're not in the milk business anymore. I think she'll be, so she'll eat less feed. She'll consume less water per unit of output. Hopefully she'll produce fewer greenhouse gases per unit of output. We're already making good progress there. She's going to be smaller and a little bit rounder. And why do I say she'll be smaller? So to support the reduced feed intake, should be a little bit rounder so that she's got some body reserves she can mobilize during transition, so that she's able to be more robust in early lactation. She'll be longer lived. It takes a tremendous investment to grow a replacement heifer. The longer a cow stays in the herd, the better. She'll be fertile so that she conceives easily to strong natural heats. She'll produce more milk solids. She's going to have to be more heat tolerant because the places where we produce cattle are getting warmer. She'll be polled. And I've already mentioned robust in a sense. What I mean by robust is she's just going to be more durable, right? She's not going to get sick as often. She's not going to have as many mobility problems. She's going to breed easily. She's going to fit well into the production system. She's not going to be too big for the stalls, those kinds of things. And this final point, again, is a U.S.-centric point of view, but as beef on dairy gets more important, she's going to have desirable carcass characteristics, right? She's going to have very few liver abscesses. She's going to have uniformity and consistency of the ribeye, those kinds of things. She's going to marble well so that she scores well on the pricing grid for bonuses. And those things are important because it means there'll be a market for those cattle. And is this the best cow for Argentina? And it may not be, because every country is different, right? You have a different climate, you have different feeds, different housing, and you have different traditions around the way that you farm. So the right cow for North America might not be exactly what you need in Argentina, but the advantage of working with a large company that sells genetics all over the world is we can work with you. You tell us what you need in your herd and we can help you get there. So we may not have it today, but we can have it tomorrow. And then I just wanted to have a few thoughts here to wrap up at the end. And some of these are just things for you to think about. It's not necessarily things I have answers to. So one of the points is, do we know what we don't know? And I know in the US, right, we talk a lot about these new technologies. You can put sensors on the cows. You can put sensors in the cows. You can put these new tools in the barn. But one of the questions I wonder about a lot is, do these things hold up in the field, right? I can put a sensor on a cow, but can that sensor hold up to being beat around in a freestall, for a 300-day lactation? Are data networks available? Because a lot of these new precision farming tools depend on sending a lot of data back and forth, right? Off of the farm into the cloud somewhere, and then getting analytical results back. And even in the US, there are a lot of places where there's not good access to those data networks. And also, and I think this is even more true in South America than it is in North America, when a farmer needs support, is that support available? Is there someone who you can call and get on the phone? Is there someone who speaks Spanish? Is there someone who understands your farming systems to help you? These are all questions that need to be asked about these new tools. Who's going to sort of scrutinize and pay close attention to the people who make those new tools? A lot of them are black boxes. What I mean by that is you don't know what's happening, right? It's just a machine. Some kind of data goes in and you get some sort of number out of the other side of it. Who will validate the performance? The reason people trust genomics is we validated genomics. What are the gold standards for comparison? And then how good is good enough for decision making? Somebody might come to your farm and tell you that if you feed this supplement and then you use our system, you're going to get another 1.345 kilograms, of milk a day from your cows. Well, that sounds super precise and really scientific, right? But is it actually meaningful? Maybe 1 kilo a day is good enough for what you need to do. So be careful when people are trying to sell you things with really precise numbers. And my last point, and I realize this is using an example from U.S. football and not from Argentinian football. This is my team losing the national championship last year. And the point is, all of these programs I've been talking about today require a team of people, right? Lots of people have to work together to make these things successful. The new technologies that people are offering you aren't magic. They can't solve all of your problems. They have to be part of a system, and you should ask a lot of questions about them. And I think we also often forget that consumers are on our team too, and what they think matters. We can disagree with consumers' opinions. We can feel frustrated that they don't understand things maybe the way we understand things. What we cannot do is ignore those consumers, because they're the people who go to the market, and they're the people who open their wallet and spend their money on our products. So what they think matters a lot too. And I look forward to answering your questions. And again, I appreciate the invitation from the organizers. Thank you very much for asking me to be part of your Congress.